Your cozy modern home, the one keeping you safe right now, would turn into an ice trap in a Dakota blizzard. Those strong walls, that insulation you trust so much, they'd become your worst enemy the second the power went out. Yet centuries ago, Native American families with babies and elders lived through storms that would crush most of us in a single night. No electricity, no heaters, no weather alerts. Just experience, instinct, and shelters that looked more like camping tents than homes. And somehow, they thrived. When the sky darkened and the wind began howling like a living thing, most people today would panic. But the Plains tribes didn't see chaos. They saw a pattern. A blizzard wasn't random, it was predictable. It had rules. And once you understand nature's rules, you can survive anything. Blizzards on the Great Plains almost always came from the northwest, rolling in with unstoppable force. Instead of building heavy, immovable houses to fight the wind, the tribes built tipis they could move and turn. When the storm hit, they rotated the narrowest side toward the wind so it sliced through like a blade. That cone shape wasn't just artistic. It was aerodynamics long before anyone knew the word. The harder the wind blew, the more stable the structure became, pressing the poles together instead of tearing them apart. But even the best positioning couldn't stop the cold from clawing through every seam. That's when survival turned creative. Families rubbed frozen animal fat along the outer hides of their tipis. It might sound disgusting, but it worked like magic. The slick coating repelled snow and wind, sealing out drafts better than any modern waterproof spray. It turned soft hide into natural armor, keeping the warmth in and the freezing air out. The door was another problem. A wide opening was basically an open invitation for death. So they blocked it, literally. Snow was packed tightly against the lower half of the teepee and around the entrance flap. It might seem counterintuitive to use snow as insulation, but snow traps air pockets, and trapped air means warmth. It's the same principle behind an igloo, deadly cold turned into protection. Step inside and you'd see even more genius. The floor wasn't flat. Families dug shallow pits right beneath the central fire. What? Because cold air sinks while warm air rises. Those pits collected the heaviest, coldest air, keeping the sleeping and living areas warmer. They basically built their own mini-climate zones using only dirt, fire, and physics. The cold sank where no one slept, and the warm air swirled around the family. And that noise outside, the screaming, endless wind, wasn't just terrifying background sound. It was cover. In the open plains, sound travels for miles, but in a blizzard, you're wrapped in white noise. Tribes used this to their advantage. When the world turned into a wall of sound, no enemy could hear you move, no animal could track your scent. The same storm trying to kill you became a perfect disguise. Now, here's where the teepee itself becomes something extraordinary. Every piece of its design was built on survival logic. The cone wasn't just elegant, it was functional. When snow lands on a flat roof, it piles up, gets heavy, and crushes the structure beneath. But on a teepee, snow slides right off. When wind hits flat walls, it pushes hard and rips things apart. On curved hides, it glides smoothly around, deflected instead of resisted. The design was so efficient that it didn't just survive storms, it used them. The top of the teepee held the most vital feature, the smoke hole. Without it, the family would suffocate within hours. Fire was everything, warmth, light, food, but it came with deadly risks. The smoke hole solved both problems at once. It let carbon monoxide escape while keeping enough heat trapped inside to stay alive. And because of the teepee's shape, the warm air didn't just rise and vanish. It circulated. The curved walls funneled the heat around the space like a built-in convection system. Modern architects call that passive airflow. Native Americans just called it home. Mobility was their second secret weapon. A teepee could be packed up, moved, and reassembled in less than an hour. When storms shifted or danger appeared, families didn't fight nature. They moved with it. No frozen walls to trap them, no heavy logs to carry. Their homes were extensions of the landscape, light, flexible, and smart. But the most brilliant feature wasn't visible at all. Hidden between those hides was air, trapped, still, insulating air. Each teepee had 2 layers of buffalo or deer hide with a gap between them. That air pocket worked exactly like modern thermal insulation. The outer layer faced the fury of the storm. The inner one stayed dry and warm. Even the seams were angled like shingles, channeling melting snow downward instead of letting it leak inside. Every inch of the design worked together. No wasted detail, no weak point. It's easy to look at old photos and see simplicity. But those simple structures were engineering masterpieces tuned perfectly to the environment. Modern builders spend billions trying to recreate the same efficiency with technology, Yet these families did it with nothing but instinct and centuries of observation. They learned directly from the land, which direction the wind came from, how snow packed against hides, how fire breathed inside a cone. Every generation refined the design until it was flawless. The result? A portable, aerodynamic, self-ventilating, naturally insulated home that could withstand winds strong enough to lift wagons off the ground, all built by hand with nothing but natural materials. So, the next time you feel proud of your central heating or double-glazed windows, imagine surviving on an open plain where temperatures drop below -30, the wind screams like a freight train, and snowdrifts rise taller than a person, and doing it all inside a shelter you could carry on your back. That's not just survival. That's brilliance. And before you go scrolling away, I've got a question for you. Would you last a single night in that kind of storm? Or would your walls turn against you the moment the power goes out? Tell me where you're watching this from, the mountains, the desert, or the city, and think about this. Maybe our ancestors weren't just tougher, maybe they were smarter. So, your teepee is standing firm, pointed into the storm like a spear against the wind. But surviving a Dakota blizzard wasn't just about withstanding the outside, it was about mastering the inside. What most people today don't realize is that the warmth inside those cone-shaped homes didn't come from luck or blind tradition. It came from generations of observation, physics, and pure, brilliant design. Every teepee was a system, walls within walls, layers within layers. Tribes didn't just throw hides over poles and hope for the best. They created an entire microclimate using only natural materials. Inside, families would hang what they called a dew cloth or liner hides about 3 feet above the ground. That might sound simple, but it was genius. The space between the outer wall and this inner liner trapped warm air like insulation in modern homes. Cold air slipped down the outer wall, got trapped in the pocket, and never reached the people inside. It was a living, breathing thermal barrier. Then came the snow, not an enemy but an ally. Families would deliberately pile snow around the base of the teepee, packing it tight. Most people would think that's insane. Why surround your shelter with the very thing that's freezing you? But snow, when compressed, holds air. And air means insulation. Those white banks around the base worked like natural windbreaks, sealing the teepee from drafts that could otherwise slice through like knives. But the brilliance didn't stop there. They stuffed every small gap, every tiny seam with dried grass, straw, or pine needles. Even bits of worn-out fur found a second life here. These natural fillers trapped pockets of air, and air was gold in the war against cold. You could say they invented the first eco-friendly insulation, centuries before it had a name. Now here's where things get fascinating. Some tribes used an extra liner called the ozan, a kind of inner canopy that hung from the teepee poles and curved down around the central fire. Imagine a tent inside a tent, but made from soft buffalo hide treated with animal brains to keep it flexible. The ozan trapped rising heat and redirected it down around the sleeping area, creating a bubble of warmth that stayed cozy even when the outer world froze solid. When you're surrounded by 30-mile-an-hour winds and temperatures below zero, that little bubble meant life. The most extreme camps went even further. They built external windbreaks up to 12 feet high from branches, stones, and packed earth. These weren't flimsy walls, they were fortresses. Together with the layered hides and snow mounds, they formed a multi-shield defense against winter's worst rage. It was like building a cocoon that could shrug off the apocalypse. Think about that for a second. No nails, no blueprints, no insulation foam, just nature, instinct, and perfect geometry. Modern houses use the same principles but call it passive heating design. Native engineers were doing it flawlessly centuries before architects gave it a fancy name. But of course, all the walls and hides in the world wouldn't save you without the heartbeat that kept everything alive. Fire. The fire sat at the center of everything, literally and spiritually. It wasn't just for warmth. It was family, community, survival itself. That small circle of flame turned a frozen plain into a living home. And how they managed it, that's where their understanding of balance shines. The fire had to burn hot enough to heat the teepee, but not so smoky it choked everyone inside. The placement was always dead center, not by chance but because that's where heat radiated evenly in all directions. Families learned exactly how much wood to add, which direction to face the logs, and how to adjust the smoke flaps above. Those flaps acted like primitive thermostats. Open them wide and the smoke cleared fast, close them slightly and the heat stayed longer. It was a dance between flame and air, perfected over centuries. And when trees were buried under snow or simply gone, they didn't panic. They burned what the plains gave them, dried buffalo dung. It sounds grim, but those buffalo chips burned slow, steady, and clean. No crackling sparks to set hides on fire, no billowing smoke. Just a deep, consistent heat that lasted through the night. When wood was available, they mixed it, pine cones to start, hardwood to sustain. Nothing wasted, everything efficient. Even the stones mattered. Around every fire pit, large smooth rocks formed a ring. They weren't decorations, they were heat batteries. Those stones absorbed fire's energy during the day, then released it slowly for hours after the flames died. Long after the camp quieted and everyone drifted to sleep, the stones kept whispering warmth into the frozen air. Some tribes even dug shallow trenches from outside the teepee toward the fire pit, then covered them with flat stones. These acted as hidden air tunnels, feeding oxygen directly to the flames without letting cold drafts sweep through the entrance. It made the fire burn cleaner and stronger. Another example of natural engineering that modern design is only starting to rediscover. And just in case everything went wrong, there was always a plan B. Families kept small pots of coals or burning embers sealed inside clay or metal containers near the sleeping area. These tiny heaters could keep hands and feet warm, or restart a main fire in the morning without having to battle wind and frost all over again. Redundancy wasn't luxury, it was survival. Now imagine sitting inside one of these teepees while the blizzard screams outside. The hides tremble but don't break. The wind wails but the warmth holds steady. The fire crackles, the rocks radiate heat, and children sleep under layers of fur while their parents whisper stories that have kept their people alive for generations. It's not comfort by modern standards, but it's safety. And in a world where nature tried to erase you nightly, that was everything. They didn't just build shelters. They built ecosystems of warmth, balance, and adaptation. Everything worked together: the hides, the air pockets, the fire, the snow. Each part supported the next, forming a living network of survival knowledge that modern civilization has nearly forgotten. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The Plains tribes didn't conquer nature. They cooperated with it. They listened to the wind, studied the snow, and learned to use both as allies instead of enemies. Survival wasn't brute strength. It was wisdom, patience, and respect. Would your home survive if the power went out for a week in sub-zero temperatures? Or would your advanced walls turn into a freezer? Let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and how long do you think you'd last in a storm like that? You could build the smartest teepee in the world, seal every draft, and keep your fire burning perfectly. But none of that would save you if you forgot one simple truth. Warmth isn't just about fire, it's about what you wear, where you sleep, and how you think. The tribes of the northern plains didn't just survive blizzards. They turned the act of staying warm into an art form. When the temperature plunged and the snow turned solid underfoot, animal hides became more valuable than gold. Buffalo hides were the champions, thick, dense, and layered with hair that trapped air close to the skin. A single buffalo robe could block winds that would slice through modern jackets like they were paper. These weren't just tossed around as decorations. Each hide was placed with precision, creating barriers inside the teepee that trapped warm air and reflected heat back toward the fire. But hides did more than form walls. They became the very beds people slept on. The ground might look harmless, but it's a thief. It steals your body heat faster than fire can replace it. So families built their beds like fortresses, layers of willow mats at the bottom, then fur stacked thick on top. Bear skins, elk pelts, and soft rabbit fur blankets all piled together, creating a cushion of trapped air that separated flesh from frozen earth. It wasn't luxury. It was survival physics. And when night fell and the wind screamed outside, they didn't sleep apart. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. Families huddled together under massive buffalo robes, forming human heat networks. Parents, children, elders, all wrapped as one. The body heat they shared could raise the temperature inside the teepee by several degrees. It was warmth made from love and necessity. Here's something that surprises most people. During the worst storms, families actually slept more. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's genius. Fighting the cold burns calories faster than almost anything else. Resting conserved energy, slowed breathing, and reduced heat loss. In a way, sleeping was their version of hibernation, a biological shield against starvation and exhaustion. Every member of the family had a role. Children were taught the survival rules early: no sitting directly on cold ground ever. Keep your mittens dry. Don't breathe too close to your blankets or the moisture will freeze by morning. These weren't just lessons, they were lifelines passed down through generations. Forgetting them could mean frostbite or worse. Their clothing was another masterpiece of function disguised as simplicity. Layered furs and hides created miniature insulation systems around the body. The innermost layers were soft and flexible, usually made from rabbit or deer. The outer layers were thicker, buffalo or bear, designed to repel snow and wind. Each layer trapped air just like the teepee's walls. The result? A body wrapped in living insulation. Footwear was just as ingenious. Moccasins were lined with grass, moss, or spare fur for extra insulation. Some pairs were so thick they looked awkward, but when the snow could freeze your toes solid in minutes, fashion wasn't exactly the priority. The grass acted like a natural sponge for sweat, preventing moisture buildup that could turn fatal in cold weather. When it got too damp, they swapped it for dry stuffing. Constant maintenance meant survival. Now, picture the sound of a blizzard outside, that deep, rolling roar like an ocean made of ice. Inside, the fire glows low, the air thick with warmth and smoke. Children sleep close to the center, wrapped tight in furs. Someone adds a piece of buffalo dung to the coals, and the teepee fills with a soft orange light. Outside, wolves howl through the whiteout. Inside, it's quiet, not peaceful exactly, but safe. They didn't just protect their bodies, they protected their minds. When storms lasted for days, despair could kill faster than frostbite. So they told stories. Ancient tales, creation myths, hero legends, anything that reminded them why endurance mattered. The rhythm of words became as vital as the rhythm of firewood cracking. It wasn't just warmth for the body. It was warmth for the soul. Sometimes they played small games with carved bones or stones. Simple things passed from hand to hand, keeping minds sharp and children distracted. Singing was common too, quiet chants or hums that blended with the wind outside. The sound of human voices against the storm was a declaration. We're still here. And that mental toughness mattered as much as any physical preparation. The people of the plains understood something most modern survivalists ignore: panic kills. When you panic, you waste energy. You breathe too fast. You forget what you've practiced. Calm meant control, and control meant life. Even the way they positioned themselves inside the teepee was deliberate. The strongest slept nearest the door, the first line of defense if predators or sudden gusts broke through. Elders and children rested farthest from the entrance, surrounded by warmth on all sides. Everyone knew their place. It wasn't hierarchy. It was strategy. They didn't just endure winter, they mastered it. Every decision, how to layer hides, where to sleep, how to breathe, came from thousands of winters' worth of trial and error. Nothing was wasted, not even mistakes. Those who made errors didn't live long enough to repeat them, and their lessons became the foundation of survival knowledge that was passed to the next generation like sacred scripture. It's easy to imagine these people as primitive, but when you study how they lived, you realize something incredible. They solved problems we're still struggling with. They built portable, efficient homes that outperformed modern tents. They stayed warm using renewable materials. They created systems that balanced with the land instead of destroying it. And maybe that's the real miracle. They didn't conquer winter. They adapted to it, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The storm wasn't the enemy, it was a teacher. So, the next time you complain about a cold morning or rush to turn up your thermostat, remember this. Somewhere out on those same plains, entire families once sat quietly inside their teepees, wrapped in furs, listening to the same wind you hear now, and smiling because they knew something we've forgotten. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, could you sleep through a blizzard like that? Or would you miss the sound of your heater too much? When the world outside turned white and the wind screamed like a living creature, survival became more than just warmth. It became warfare. Nature didn't care about fairness, and the blizzards that tore across the Dakotas weren't just cold. They were predators in their own right. And if you wanted to make it to spring, you had to outsmart both the storm and everything hiding in it. Winter didn't only test human endurance. It woke up the hunger of other survivors, wolves, bears, even mountain lions that stalked the edges of camps when food grew scarce. The warm glow of a teepee fire could attract more than comfort. It could call in trouble. So native families learned to build their winter camps like fortresses of strategy and silence. They never camped randomly. Every location was scouted with care. A patch of trees to block the wind, a rise in the land to stop flooding when the snow melted, and most importantly, distance from game trails or watering holes. Those places looked inviting, but they were predator highways. Setting up camp there was like sleeping on a freeway. Instead, they looked for natural pockets of protection. The lee of a hill, the edge of a ravine, anywhere the land itself could serve as a wall. But they didn't stop at smart placement. They engineered the snow itself. Families would pile snow in thick, curved mounds around the outer circle of their teepees. These weren't random piles. They were barriers carefully shaped to break up the wind and funnel predators into narrow paths. A wolf pack charging through open snow could surround you. A pack forced into a single path could be controlled. They turned the landscape into a defense grid, invisible to the untrained eye, lethal to anything foolish enough to cross it. The camps themselves were arranged like shields. The strongest hunters and warriors positioned their tipis on the outer rim, forming a living wall. Elders and children slept in the center, protected by layers of people and hide. The smoke from fires was managed so it drifted upward, not outward, revealing nothing to distant eyes. Even the number of tipis in a group was planned, so outsiders couldn't easily guess the size of the community. It was a design of silence and strength. And when predators grew bold, they fought back with intelligence, not panic. Torches of burning resin were waved to scatter wolves. Spears heated in fire were planted at angles in the snow, invisible traps for animals lunging toward the camp. Even sound was weaponized. A chorus of human voices, yelling, chanting, drums beating against hides, could echo across the frozen night like an army 10 times larger than it was. But nature wasn't their only enemy. Sometimes the cold itself turned so brutal that normal rules didn't work anymore. Firewood vanished under snowdrifts, buffalo dung froze solid, and the air itself seemed to shatter like glass. That's when the tribes pulled out their most desperate and ingenious survival moves. One of those was the heated stone trick, a method that still works today. Large river rocks were placed directly in the fire until they glowed red, then carefully rolled out and buried beneath layers of fur bedding. Hours later, while the wind howled and the fire burned low, those stones radiated gentle warmth like invisible suns. Children could sleep through the coldest nights without shivering. It wasn't comfort, it was controlled physics. Another invention was the frozen shield, hides soaked in water and left outside to freeze solid. Once hardened, they were draped around the lower parts of the teepee or propped like barricades. The result was armor, a layer so tough that even hurricane-force winds couldn't tear through. Strangely, the frozen hides actually made the teepee warmer inside, sealing every microgap and forcing cold air to slide off instead of sneaking in. Then there were the lifelines. During whiteouts, visibility dropped to 0. You could step 2 paces from your teepee and disappear forever. So families tied heavy ropes from pole to pole, a network of tactile pathways linking each shelter to the firewood piles, food caches, and even animal pens. In the chaos of a storm, those ropes became literal lifelines. You could hold one in total blindness and still find your way home. Letting go meant death. Water was another enemy hiding in plain sight. Containers made from clay or wood would crack when frozen, so they turned to biology. Cleaned animal stomachs became flexible water bladders that could freeze and thaw without breaking. It sounds disgusting, but in the deep cold it was brilliant. Water meant life, and this ugly trick kept it flowing when every stream turned solid. Their ingenuity didn't end there. When everything else failed, they used the storm itself as cover. During blizzards, when no predator dared to move and no rival tribe could track footprints, they relocated. Entire camps would vanish overnight, carried by sleighs and travois through whiteouts that blinded everything else. To outsiders, it looked suicidal, moving during the worst of it. But for them, it was camouflage. The storm hid them better than any wall ever could. Every trick, every adaptation was born from pain. They didn't learn this in a classroom. They learned it through trial, error, and loss. A child who froze because the bedding was too thin taught a generation to double their hides. A camp lost to wolves taught them where not to build next time. Mistakes carved the blueprints for survival. It's easy to look back and romanticize this way of life. The flickering firelight, the sound of wind against the hides, the quiet strength of people who refused to break. But make no mistake, this wasn't just resilience. It was genius. A kind of genius that came not from books or inventions, but from the relentless partnership between human instinct and the natural world. They didn't dominate nature. They collaborated with it. Every gust of wind, every shift in snow, every pattern of ice became a lesson written in white ink across the frozen plains. And they read it fluently. Think about that the next time a winter storm cuts your power for a few hours. Most people panic when the thermostat drops a few degrees. But for centuries, families faced nights where failure meant extinction, and they didn't just survive, they thrived. Maybe we've traded too much comfort for too little understanding. Maybe, deep down, our ancestors knew something that modern civilization has forgotten, that survival isn't about control. It's about awareness, adaptation, and respect. So next time you see snow piling up outside your window, ask yourself, would your house protect you, or kill you? And if you made it to the end of this story, hit that like button and tell me, where are you watching from and how cold does it get where you live? Because out there on the plains, what they called cold would make most of us run for our thermostats.